When Iris Lin was 22, the parents who abandoned her finally came looking. Their reunion gift was a gold-embossed VIP medical checkup card. Every test on the panel, Iris noticed, was for a bone marrow donor. Their son was dying of leukemia. She was his only match, ***. But Iris had a secret. She'd already agreed to donate months ago, to a stranger. The family didn't know that. They thought they were reeling in a desperate orphan. They didn't know about the receipt she'd found in her grandmother's old tin box, $20,000, signed by her father, the price of a birth certificate that was never filed. They didn't know about the twin sister they'd kept, who risked everything to warn her. And they didn't know that Iris had a voice recorder hidden under her collar and a lawyer on speed dial, ***. This is a story about the debts that bind families and the lies that tear them apart. About a woman who couldn't write her own name but taught her granddaughter the only lesson that mattered: you are not defined by where you're abandoned. You're defined by where you choose to walk when the light is almost gone, ***. My biological parents found me after 22 years. Their welcome home gift was a medical checkup card. At the reunion dinner, my mother wept and said she just wanted to know if I was healthy. It wasn't until I turned the card over that I noticed every single test on the panel was a preoperative workup for a stem cell donor. Tomorrow morning, they'd draw my blood. Either this was a family reunion, or I was just the spare bone marrow they tracked down for their son. The card was gold-embossed, the kind of heavy, expensive stationery that announces seriousness of intent. A VIP wellness package, $530, the sort of gift corporations give to executives they're trying to poach. Margaret Hart held it out with both hands, her 10 fingers arranged neatly along the edges, her nails freshly done in a subdued rose. Everything about her was calculated restraint: the modest pearl earrings, the cashmere cardigan draped just so over her shoulders, the way her voice trembled at precisely the right syllables. Iris, baby. The tears balanced on the rims of her eyes without falling, a masterclass in emotional choreography. Mom's not asking you to forgive her. After all these years, Mom just wants to know, are you healthy? Did you suffer out there? Were you ever sick? The relatives nodded in unison around the private dining room. Aunt Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. Aunt Victoria chimed in about how thoughtful Richard and Margaret were, how blood was thicker than water, how finding me was a miracle. Uncle Mark raised his glass from across the table and said something about the family finally being whole. The room held 2 round tables, the tablecloths starched so white they practically glowed, the lazy Susans loaded with crystal shrimp dumplings and soy-braised beef and cold sesame noodles. Richard Hart had spared no expense to reclaim a daughter he'd thrown away 22 years ago. I took the card, flipped it over, and scanned the fine print on the back. This package includes complete blood count, liver and kidney function panel, EKG, full abdominal ultrasound, infectious disease panel, HLA high-resolution typing. The rest was obscured by the price sticker. I didn't bother peeling it off. I didn't need to. I'd spent a year sitting in hematology waiting rooms while my grandmother went through chemotherapy. I knew exactly what an HLA typing test was for, and it wasn't a wellness checkup. Okay. I said it too quickly. The table went quiet for a beat, that particular silence that falls when someone deviates from the expected script. Margaret froze, her carefully prepped tears hanging at the corners of her eyes, caught between falling and retreating. She looked like an actress who'd forgotten her next line, but the curtain had already gone up. Under the table, Richard nudged her elbow. A quick, sharp jab, the tablecloth rippled, and the red wine in my glass shivered. She snapped back to life like someone had pressed a button. Oh, and Iris, sweetheart, have you ever had any major surgeries? Do you take any long-term medications? No. She and my father exchanged a glance. It lasted maybe half a second, fast enough that none of the relatives noticed. But I saw it. That glance held relief. It held confirmation. It was the look two business partners give each other when they've just closed a deal on favorable terms, and they're already mentally spending the profit. Aunt Patricia broke the silence, smiling as she dropped a piece of sweet and sour pork onto my plate. A checkup is such a thoughtful gift. Your parents just want to make sure you haven't developed any health problems after all those hard years. Peace of mind for everyone. It's not about whether I've developed health problems. I picked up a piece of steamed fish with my chopsticks, taking my time to lift away the fine bones. The fish was perfectly cooked, the scallions sliced razor thin, the soy sauce pooling clear and amber on the porcelain. I waited until every face at the table was turned toward me. They want to make sure I meet the specifications. Every smile at the table cracked just a fraction. Aunt Patricia's chopsticks paused in midair. Aunt Victoria's teacup stopped halfway to her lips. Margaret's expression fractured like a mirror with a single crack running down the middle. But these people had spent decades navigating dinner parties and business negotiations. They recovered in under a second, laughing it off, calling me witty, saying young people had such a dark sense of humor these days. Only Margaret's hand, hidden beneath the tablecloth, slowly curled into a fist. The starched white linen bunched into wrinkles between her fingers. I kept eating my fish. The restaurant was excellent. A dinner like this had to run at least $400. Add the checkup card at $530, and the welcome home package was approaching $1,000. $1,000 to buy back a daughter they discarded. $1,000 for a bone marrow match that could save their son's life. The arithmetic was elegant in its brutality. What a bargain. 3 months earlier, I'd gotten a phone call. I was working the morning shift at the nursing home, just finishing turning Mrs. Eleanor in bed 3. She was 93, light as dried kindling, with a stubborn streak that hadn't dimmed with age. She complained the whole time that my hands were cold, that she could feel them through the blanket, that in her day nurses had warm hands. I tucked the covers around her and promised to warm them up next time. She glared at me and fished a caramel candy from under her pillow, pressing it into my palm with a fierce look. "Eat it," she said. Asterisk, you're built like a stick. Who's taking care of who around here? Asterisk. My phone vibrated for a long time before I answered. The caller ID showed a local area code I didn't recognize. I peeled off one latex glove and swiped to answer, still pushing the med cart with my other hand toward the end of the hallway. "Hello, is this Iris Lin?" The woman on the line had a crisp, professional voice, the kind that reads from scripts for a living, carefully calibrated to deliver life-changing news without spilling emotion into the syllables. "I'm Dr. Elaine Zhou from the National Marrow Donor Registry. Your blood sample, registered with us in 2023, has come back as a preliminary match for a patient with a hematological condition. I'm calling to ask, is your health still suitable, and are you still willing to proceed with confirmatory HLA typing?" The window at the end of the hallway was open. Spring rain was falling, fine as mist, drifting in to dampen the half-dead pothose plant on the sill. The nursing home corridor stretched long and quiet, the air carrying its permanent perfume of antiseptic and the particular, not unpleasant scent that very old bodies give off, lavender powder and baby shampoo and the faint, sweet undertone of thyme. I stood by the window, the rain misting my face, and asked only one question. "How old is the patient?" "I'm sorry. Under international protocol and federal privacy regulations, donor and recipient information is kept strictly confidential. I can't disclose patient details." She paused, and I heard papers rustling on her end, the sound of someone flipping through a file, finding the right page. I can only tell you this much, the patient is very young. Very young, those two words dropped into my ears like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward in slow circles. I leaned against the windowsill, watching the rain, and thought about Dorothy. My grandmother, though legally she wasn't my grandmother at all, just a stranger who'd found me and decided to keep me, had been diagnosed with lung cancer 2 years ago. I'd quit my previous job at a warehouse and found work at the nursing home closest to the hospital. Days, I worked. Nights, I sat by her bed. The hematology ward was on the 7th floor, and the corridor was lined with donor recruitment posters, 2 hands clasped together, the slogan beneath reading * be the match. Save a life, * during her first round of chemo, hooked up to and 4, hair still intact, spirit still good. Dorothy had stared at that poster for a long time. The fluid in her 4 dripped steadily down. She watched it, and then she said, quite simply, "Iris, this is good." I asked her what she meant. She said it was life-saving. She pointed at the 2 hands on the poster. Look. Someone else's child is sick, and someone else can save them. If our Iris could save someone's life, that would be a blessing. Then she paused and added, in that practical way of hers, * you're healthy. You're young. What's a little blood? Dorothy couldn't read the words on the poster. She'd never learned to read a single word in her life. She couldn't even write her own name properly. On every document she ever signed, there was just the red print of her thumb. But she understood those 2 hands. She understood the transaction they represented, one person's small sacrifice, another person's whole future. I'll do it. I said it quietly, but I meant it absolutely. After I hung up, I went back to pushing the med cart. I didn't tell anyone about the call. There wasn't really anyone to tell. Dorothy had been gone for 4 months by then. My co-workers at the nursing home and I were friendly, but friendship stopped at the cafeteria and the shift schedule. My phone contacts, outside of delivery drivers and customer service numbers, held no one I called regularly. I'd registered with the donor bank because of her. The day after she pointed at that poster, I'd gone to a mobile blood drive parked outside the hospital, filled out the paperwork, and let them draw 8 small vials of blood. It took 10 minutes. I barely thought about it again until the phone rang. Dorothy had spent her life picking things up. Cardboard boxes. Plastic bottles. Discarded furniture left on curbs by families who were moving. Broken chairs with missing legs. Wilted vegetables from the market at the end of the day. She could find a use for anything. The neighbors on our street all said the same thing, that old woman could patch a pair of torn shoes into art. And on one evening 22 years ago, she'd also picked up a child. It had been drizzling. She'd been pushing her scrap-collecting cart past the underpass on the south side of the river when she heard crying, faint, thin, like a kitten's mewling, on and off. She thought it was a litter of strays and dug through a pile of wet cardboard, and found an infant. A newborn, face purple with cold, wrapped in a hand-knitted red wool sweater. The stitching was close and even, the cuffs slightly pilled, the kind of careful work someone had put hours into. Tucked inside the sweater was a slip of red paper, the edges cut neat and square, with a single line written in ballpoint pen. Born June 18, 2004. No name. Nothing else. No, I'm sorry, no, I can't afford to keep her, no explanation at all. 22 years later, the red paper had gone soft at the edges, the ballpoint ink bleeding slightly where moisture had touched it, but the line was still legible. 7 words. No name. Not even a period at the end. Dorothy couldn't read. She carried that slip of paper and asked half the people on the street before someone finally told her what it said. Later, she told me the story many times over, and the details always shifted a little. Sometimes the rain was heavier, sometimes she'd just picked up a used television that day, sometimes the baby was crying louder. But the ending never changed. She tucked that purple-faced infant against her chest, wrapped the red sweater tighter, and turned her card around. She said the sky was darkening by the time she found me, the last light pulling away to the west, the street lamps along the river road just starting to glow in soft yellow puddles. So she named me Iris, because the iris blooms at dusk, when the light is fading but not yet gone. She hadn't gone to school a day in her life, but she thought the words sounded beautiful, gentle, like the last bit of brightness before night falls. She went to the county clerk's office and gave me her surname, Lin, because she said every child deserved a family name, even if the family was just one old woman and a baby. She was the one who raised me, in a one-room house at the dead end of Chestnut Lane. The walls peeled in the summer humidity. The roof leaked when it rained hard, and she'd set out old coffee cans to catch the drips. But she fed me pork rib soup while she ate pickled vegetables and rice. She ran a breakfast cart at the mouth of the alley for 30 years, tea eggs steeped in soy and star anise, silky tofu pudding, fried dough sticks golden and crisp. She was up at 4 every morning to light the coal stove, and she didn't close until after dark. Last winter, she died. I sat by her bed while the snow fell outside the hospital window, holding her hand, a hand that had washed too many things, scrubbed too many clothes, worn rough as sandpaper. In her last month, she couldn't speak anymore. But when she was lucid, she'd look at me and trace something on the blanket with her finger, over and over. I leaned close and watched for a long time before I understood. She was writing her own name. 3 letters, all crooked, nothing lined up, something she'd spent a lifetime doing and never got right. For months after she passed, the house she'd left me, that one-room place on Chestnut Lane with its flaking walls and sagging roof, suddenly had a demolition notice posted on the telephone pole outside. Official documents, government seals, announcing a redevelopment project, compensation packages, relocation timelines. 9 days after those notices went up, Margaret Hart appeared at the entrance of my nursing home, weeping, crying that she'd searched for me for 22 years. She clutched at my arm with both hands, her manicured nails digging in, her voice carrying down the street. Even the tears seemed to arrive on schedule. 3 days after the reunion dinner, they asked me to move in. "We're family," Richard said, thumping his chest. "We've been apart for 22 years. Not a single day more." He stood under the crooked locust tree outside the nursing home, his rosewood beads clicking through his fingers, his voice thick with staged emotion. Margaret wept on my left. Aunt Patricia packed my suitcase on my right. I said okay. I agreed because when a fish takes the hook, you let it swallow deep before you pull. The Hart home was a 1,400 square foot apartment on the 14th floor of a modern high-rise, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, recently renovated with granite countertops and hardwood floors. The living room featured an enormous family portrait, Richard and Margaret seated in the center, flanked by a son and a daughter, all 4 of them wearing matching white polo shirts against a fake ivy-covered wall. Lucas, in the photo, was maybe 15, round-faced, grinning with the uncomplicated confidence of a boy who'd never been denied anything. Maya was about the same age, ponytailed, her smile calibrated to match the other 3 exactly. My room was a converted storage closet next to the balcony. The door wasn't originally a door. They'd knocked an opening through the drywall and installed a hollow core door that didn't quite fit the frame. The room measured maybe 40 square feet. It held a single bed, one Maya had outgrown, the headboard still plastered with faded cartoon stickers peeled halfway off. The mattress sagged in the middle where the springs had given out. There was no window. Just a fluorescent light on the ceiling that buzzed when you turned it on and flickered twice before it reluctantly stayed lit. "Iris, sweetheart, it's just for a few days," Margaret said, wringing her hands. Her smile looked washed out in the harsh white light. "Once we get through this busy period, once your brother's situation stabilizes, Mom will get you a bigger room. A real room with a bay window, facing the morning sun. This is fine." I set my suitcase against the wall and looked around the 40 square feet. I smiled. "It's bigger than places I've lived before." Her smile faltered. She let out a dry little laugh and didn't ask what places those were. That evening at dinner, while the braised pork ribs were still steaming on the table, I asked to see the family registry. Richard's chopsticks paused mid-reach. He shot Margaret a look. She sprang up as if stung, abandoning her bowl, and rushed to the bedroom, rummaging through a locked drawer to produce a leather-bound booklet, which she presented to me like a sacred text. The gold-stamped emblem on the cover had worn dull from handling. I opened it. Page 1, Head of Household, Richard Hart. Page 2, Spouse, Margaret Hart. Page 3, Son, Lucas Hart, born 2007. Page 4, Eldest daughter, Maya Hart. Date of birth, June 18, 2004. I stared at that line for 3 full seconds. June 18, 2004. The date on the red paper tucked inside the wool sweater. The date Dorothy had kept pressed under the glass top of her sewing machine for 22 years. Every year on that day, she would boil an extra tea egg on her breakfast cart stove, and in the evening, she'd set a bowl of sweet poached eggs on the sewing machine and pull me over to sit. She never said anything sentimental. Just "Iris, eat your egg," and she'd watch me, smiling, the wrinkles at her eyes folding into petals. My birthday. Under someone else's name. Maya was adopted later, Margaret explained, her voice falling into a practice rhythm, like a passage she'd rehearsed so many times it had worn a groove in her memory. Back then, the family planning policies were so strict. When we registered her, for convenience, we just casually used that date. Thought, since it was vacant anyway. Casually, I closed the registry and smiled. That works out great. Now I don't even have to change my birthday. She didn't understand what I meant, but she smiled back, relieved, and locked the registry away. That night, lying on the sagging mattress in the storage room, I listened to the living room clock strike midnight. This family had celebrated June 18th every year. Cake, candles, birthday songs. A table full of presents. For 22 years, my birthday had been celebrated in grand style in this house. Just never by me. I was sleeping in a converted closet, and the birthday they'd stolen from me was, in Margaret's words, just a date they'd casually used. The checkup was on Thursday. Margaret accompanied me through the VIP lane, 8 vials of blood, EKG, ultrasound, the works. She hovered the entire time, clutching my jacket, handing me tissues, pressing down on the cotton ball over the needle mark afterward. At noon, while she went to the front desk to get the official receipt, she left the itemized statement on the waiting room chair. I picked it up. The test panel was dense with medical terminology, CD3+ and CD19+ lymphocyte subsets, HLA-A/B/C/DR/DQ high-resolution typing, infectious disease panel, coagulation profile, complete metabolic panel, chest X-ray, EKG, pulmonary function test. A routine physical didn't test for these things. A routine physical checked your cholesterol and your blood sugar, maybe a mammogram if you were over 40. This panel, from top to bottom, was laser-focused on one organ, my bone marrow. This was a full donor preoperative workup, the exact battery of tests required before a stem cell harvest. I set the statement back on the chair and sipped the soy milk Margaret had bought me. It was too sweet. She'd probably assumed all young women liked sweet things. On the drive home, she asked, casually, eyes on the road, "You've been healthy all these years? No major illnesses?" I said Dorothy fed me well. She ate pickled vegetables and gave me the pork ribs. Margaret laughed dryly, adjusted the rearview mirror, and turned up the radio. She never wanted to hear about Dorothy. In this house, Dorothy didn't exist. The woman who'd raised me for 22 years, who'd fed me and clothed me and pressed her thumbprint onto every document that required a signature. In the Heart's version of the story, she was an inconvenient detail, an obstacle, a footnote they wished they could erase. That night, at 1 in the morning, someone knocked on my door. 3 taps, soft. A pause. 3 more. Not Margaret's knock. Margaret's was brisk, businesslike. This knock was hesitant, fingernails scraping lightly against the hollow wood, as though the person was afraid of waking the rest of the house but more afraid of not being heard. I opened the door. The hallway nightlight cast a dim amber glow. Maya stood there in faded cotton pajamas, her hair unbound around her shoulders, making her face look very small. She was clutching a manila envelope against her chest, both arms wrapped tight around it. When she saw me, she glanced back toward the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Silence. Richard's snoring rumbled faintly through the door. "Sis." The word came out unfamiliar but natural, like a spell pronounced correctly for the first time. She shoved the envelope into my hands, her movements quick and desperate, as if she were passing a live grenade. "Read it, then burn it. And before they make their move, run. This family is worse than you can imagine." I looked down at the envelope, then back up at her face. In the dim light, her eyes were startlingly bright. I grabbed her wrist before she could leave. "Why are you telling me this?" She was quiet for a moment. In the master bedroom, Richard turned over, the bed frame creaking. "Because I ate your grandmother's tea eggs," she said, her back still to me. "When I was in elementary school. That breakfast cart at the mouth of Chestnut Lane. The old woman always gave me the biggest one, the one with the most cracks in the shell. She said the broth soaked in better." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "My mom dragged me the long way around after that. She said that cart was bad luck. I didn't understand then. The bad luck wasn't the cart. It was them. Too guilty to walk past your grandmother's face." Inside the envelope were Lucas's medical records. Acute myeloid leukemia. Diagnosed last October at 18 years old, just weeks after his high school graduation. Induction chemotherapy, consolidation, partial remission. The attending physician had scrawled in the margins, *urgently recommend allogeneic stem cell transplant. Potential unrelated donor match identified through National Registry. Awaiting donor workup, * the date on the file was 3 months ago. "You already knew," Maya said, leaning against my doorframe. "When you took that card at the dinner, you weren't surprised at all." I told her the registry had contacted me months ago. By law, the patient's family wasn't supposed to know who I was. Donor and recipient information was strictly segregated, a firewall designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation. Firewalls. Maya laughed bitterly. "Our father bought the hospital administrator a $400 dinner and 2 cartons of imported cigarettes. That's how firewalls work in this family." She told me everything. After Lucas's diagnosis, Richard had worked his contacts and found a man named Gerald Zhang in hospital administration, Aunt Victoria's cousin's husband. Over a seafood dinner, Gerald had hemmed and hawed about confidentiality regulations until Richard slid the cigarettes across the table. Then he'd talked. Donor name, Iris Lin. Address, Chestnut Lane. The night Richard came home with that information, the family held a meeting behind closed doors. Grandmother Hart banged her cane on the floor and declared it wasn't a coincidence, it was fate, heaven sending back what they'd thrown away. A daughter of their own blood was more reliable than a stranger. A daughter couldn't refuse without the whole world calling her heartless. And a daughter cost nothing. A daughter can also play nurse, Maya said. And a daughter can be offered up to settle a debt. She pulled a crumpled red paper from her pajama pocket. A draft wedding invitation. The groom, Gerald Zhang Jr. The bride, Maya Hart. The administrator who leaked your information. Favors that big have to be repaid. Our family pays its debts with its daughters. She smiled, a thin, fragile thing that didn't reach her eyes. We make a great pair, Iris. One pays with her body. One pays with her marriage. Between the two of us, we make one complete daughter. Then she told me the rest. We were twins, fraternal, born June 18, 2004. A fortune teller had been summoned to the house. Grandmother Hart was deeply superstitious, consulting oracles for every major decision, and the old man had counted on his fingers and declared, twin daughters cancel out the sun. Raise both girls under one roof, and no male heir would ever be conceived. The solution was to keep one daughter to summon the sun and discard the other to lift the curse. Maya was kept because she weighed more at birth. Grandmother declared the lighter one's fate was too thin to be worth keeping. Maya was originally named Hope for a son. Lucas arrived 3 years later, and the fortune teller was paid a bonus. I've known since I was 16, Maya said. Mom got drunk on rice wine one night and sobbed all over me about the sister I never knew, the twin who was given away. She said it was fate. She said she had no choice. She said she'd cried for weeks. Maya paused. Then the next morning she acted like nothing had happened, and she never mentioned you again until Lucas got sick. Before she left, she gripped my wrist with those cold fingers. Once the checkup comes back clean, they'll push you straight into the collection process. The people in this house want your blood, want your house, want to carve you up and sell the pieces. Run, Iris. Before they move. I said, I'm not running. I'm waiting for them to move first. The day the results came back, our Iris is in perfect health, every marker optimal. Richard threw a celebration dinner. 6 dishes, soup, the table groaning under the weight of it all. Halfway through, he set down his chopsticks and leaned in, his voice shifting into negotiation mode. Iris, Dad has something to discuss. Your grandmother's old house on Chestnut Lane, it's being acquired by the city for redevelopment. The compensation package is substantial. A young woman like you, dealing with the housing authority, they'll eat you alive. Let Dad handle the negotiations. I took a bite of sweet and sour rib. Sounds great. We'll need a power of attorney, he said, testing the waters. You sign, and Dad takes care of everything. The compensation goes into a trust for you, your future nest egg. Not a cent touched. Of course, Dad. Just draft the paperwork. His jaw went slack with relief. That night, the light in his study stayed on past 1. The next morning, a stack of documents was laid out on the dining table with a black pen placed neatly alongside. A power of attorney, granting Richard Hart full and irrevocable authority to negotiate, sign, and receive payment for all demolition compensation matters. Underneath was a draft they'd forgotten to remove, crumpled once, then smoothed flat again, a gift declaration transferring all compensation rights from Iris Lin to 𝐃𝐄𝐒𝐂𝐋𝐁. They'd even left the date blank for me to fill in. I picked up the pen, hovered over the signature line, then set it down with a decisive click. Dad, my handwriting is terrible. It would embarrass you. Let me practice for a couple of days. I pulled a calligraphy practice book from my bag. You told me to improve my penmanship, so I'm taking it seriously. A muscle jumped in Richard's jaw. His smile was glued on, rigid. No rush. Calligraphy builds character. From the Hart House, I went to 3 places. First, a law firm downtown. The lawyer, Catherine Wu, was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed, and she'd once shared a hospital room with Dorothy during a brief stay for pneumonia. Dorothy had sent her home with 4 tea eggs. Catherine remembered. I laid out the property deed, Dorothy's notarized will, and my acceptance of inheritance. Handle the demolition negotiations. From now on, if anyone claiming to be my family contacts the housing authority, don't tell them a word. Second, I called Dr. Zhou at the registry from a bench in the park across the street. The patient's family has my identity. They used a hospital insider to access my confidential donor information. They've run me through a donor physical under the guise of a welcome home checkup and are now trying to have me sign property transfer documents. Dr. Zhou's voice sharpened to a blade. Every word will be documented and escalated. The information leak is a serious violation. The hospital's ethics committee has been notified. She paused. Has your willingness to donate changed? No. I watched a squirrel dart up a maple tree. I made a promise to my grandmother. I'm donating to the 19-year-old patient in the registry. That has nothing to do with the hearts. Third, a small electronics shop wedged between a laundromat and a Thai takeout place. I bought a black digital voice recorder, the size of my thumb, $45. 12 hours of continuous recording. I hung it around my neck, tucked it under my collar, and went back to the Hart's apartment to practice my calligraphy. Between pages 3 and 4 of the copybook, I placed a very important document. On Saturday, I went back to the old house on Chestnut Lane to sort through Dorothy's belongings. Maya came with me. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds, dust filming every surface. Inside, the smell hit me first, old wood, sun-dried soap, and something else, something only old houses carry. The smell of home. Faded, but not yet gone. I pried open Dorothy's old red tin box, the one with the peonies printed on the lid. The lock was rusted shut. I had to break it with a screwdriver. Inside, the contents of her life, arranged in careful layers. On top, my vaccination records, every school tuition receipt from elementary through high school, each one clipped and sorted by year. An illiterate old woman had kept every scrap of paper connected to me as if it were a sacred text, preserved against the day someone might need proof that I existed, that I'd been cared for, that I mattered. Beneath the receipts was a draft letter, written in someone else's careful elementary school penmanship. Dorothy must have asked a neighbor to write it for her. Asterisk, this child is your flesh and blood. I don't want a cent from you. I don't need you to raise her. I am only begging you to do one thing, register her birth so she can go to school, so she can see a doctor when she's sick. I will raise her for you. An old widow like me has no use for your money. I'm only asking for this one thing, asterisk. Below the letter, a police incident report from September 1, 2004. The report was typed, formal and bureaucratic, asterisk found one abandoned female infant, approximate age newborn, wrapped in red wool sweater. After extensive neighborhood inquiry, biological parents could not be immediately located. The finder has been advised of procedures for foster registration, asterisk. And at the very bottom of the tin, pressed flat beneath everything else as if she'd been trying to bury it, a single sheet of paper. Old-fashioned stationery with a printed floral border. The writing was in heavy fountain pen, the pressure so hard it had nearly punctured the paper in places. Asterisk received from Miss Dorothy Lin, $20,000. To be applied toward expenses related to the child's birth registration. Signed, Richard Hart. September 2, 2004, asterisk. Maya leaned over my shoulder. Her face went white in stages, forehead, then cheeks, then lips pressed bloodless. "That's my dad's handwriting," she whispered. $20,000. In the economy of a breakfast cart, 50-cent tea eggs, $1 tofu puddings, they represented years of labor. Dorothy must have saved every coin, every crumpled bill, hoarding it in this very tin box until she had enough. She'd given it to them, believing it would buy me a legal identity. They'd taken the money, moved away, and never registered my birth. The $20,000 paid the fine for Lucas's birth 3 years later. Margaret had admitted it once, drunk, thanking Providence for the money from outside. The money from selling one daughter had financed the birth of the son. I tucked the receipt into my copybook, between pages 3 and 4. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked. I said, "Practice my handwriting. Dad wants it improved." In the following days, the offensive escalated. I visited Lucas in the hospital, a skeleton in a bed, hair gone, his nightstand crowded with a Nintendo Switch and imported supplements while his body was being eaten from the inside. He cried and said, "I'm sorry. When I get better, I'll tell them to give the house back." That word, *back*, told me everything. In his mind, it already belonged to him. He was 19, and he was dying, and I couldn't bring myself to hate him. But I couldn't bring myself to trust him either. Margaret called, screaming that I'd upset him. Aunt Patricia called the nursing home director, accusing me of being a heartless donor refuser who shouldn't be caring for the elderly. Margaret posted a long, tearful essay in the family group chat, complete with photos of Lucas in chemo, his face pale, his head bald, 4 lines in his arm, begging me to save him. The relatives piled on. Their messages filled my phone. Not one of them asked how I'd spent those 22 years. Not one knew, or cared, that I'd already agreed to the donation months ago. Friday night, Richard called. His voice was stripped of all pretense, cold and hard as a pipe wrench. Sunday noon. "The whole family will be here. We'll settle 2 things face to face, Lucas's transplant, and that house. If you still want to be part of this family, you'll sign." "Fine," I said. Sunday. Sunday arrived. The living room was packed beyond capacity, Grandmother Hart enthroned on the couch, Aunt Patricia and her husband, Uncle Mark, Aunt Victoria, even a few second cousins I'd never met. The coffee table held fruit platters and a pot of jasmine tea and 2 documents, the power of attorney and the gift declaration. The moment I walked in, Grandmother Hart banged her cane on the hardwood. "Kneel and bow to your parents. 22 years, and you won't even call them mother and father." I didn't kneel. I took the armchair by the window, set my bag on my lap, and felt the weight of the copybook inside. Richard convened the meeting. 2 matters. Lucas's transplant, the doctors say we must start mobilization next week. And the house. Sign the power of attorney today. The relatives took up their cues on schedule. Blood is thicker than water. Saving a life brings blessings. The procedure is completely safe, no long-term effects. One by one, their lines came out, rehearsed as a church choir. I listened for 5 minutes. Then I spoke. First, let me ask a question. How did any of you find out that I was the registered donor? Silence. Richard's eyelid twitched. That's not. I pulled out my phone, set it on the coffee table, and pressed speakerphone. Dr. Zhou's voice filled the room. The unauthorized disclosure of your confidential donor information has been formally escalated. Hospital personnel involved have been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Your confirmatory typing is complete, you are cleared for donation, and your willingness has never wavered since you were first contacted 3 months ago. I hung up. The silence was absolute, the kind of vacuum where sound itself seems to have been sucked out of the air. Aunt Patricia spun toward Richard, her voice cracking. Richard. You told us she was refusing. You made me call her workplace. She agreed 3 months ago. I never refused. My voice was calm, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. I registered in 2023. When they called about a match, I said yes immediately. I didn't know who the patient was. You pulled strings, broke federal confidentiality regulations, and discovered the donor was the daughter you threw away. And conveniently, her house is being demolished. I looked at Margaret. That checkup card wasn't to see if I was healthy. It was to see if I could be harvested. And the house. I glanced at my watch. An hour ago, my attorney finalized the demolition agreement with the housing authority. The compensation is in a supervised account under my name. Those documents on the table, I picked up the power of attorney and the gift declaration and tore them in half. Are worthless. Richard shot to his feet, his face purpling. You ungrateful wretch. We gave you life. There it was. The line I'd been waiting for. I opened my copybook and placed the receipt on the coffee table, centered between the fruit platter and the torn documents. Let's settle that account. Asterisk received from Ms. Dorothy Lin, $20,000. For the child's birth registration. Signed, Richard Hart. September 2nd, 2004, asterisk. Dorothy Lin was my grandmother. She found you 22 years ago and begged you to register my birth. You said, bring us $20,000. She sold tea eggs for years to save that money, 40,000 tea eggs, 25,000 bowls of tofu pudding, every cent she had. You took it, moved away, and never registered me. The money paid the fine for Lucas's birth. You sold one child to pay for the other. Now you want my blood to save his life. The room was a tomb. Richard lunged, snatched the receipt, and tore it to shreds. Dead witnesses. A fake. Your grandmother's dead and can't. That was a photocopy, I said quietly. The original is in my attorney's safe. I made 22 copies, one for each year my grandmother raised me. Grandmother Hart began wailing about the fortune teller, how twin daughters blocked the sun, how they'd had no choice. I interrupted her, my voice soft as a blade slipping between ribs. 22 years ago, you said I would block the sun. Now, out of 2 million donors, only I can save his life. Grandmother, recalculate. Who was blocking whom? She fell silent, her mouth open, no sound coming out. I stood. 3 things. 1. The donation proceeds. I'll take the injections next week. But from now on, we follow formal isolation protocol, donor and recipient separated by the coordinator. No visits. No family reunions. 2. The administrator who leaked my information is under investigation. Aunt Victoria, tell the Zhangs the engagement is off. Maya's wedding invitation, I've torn it up. In the corner, Maya pressed her hand to her mouth, crying and smiling at once. 3. I walked to the door and looked back at the room of stunned relatives, the family portrait on the wall, the torn paper on the coffee table, the shattered expressions. Don't bother updating the family registry. My name was never in it. That saves me the trouble of having it removed. I pulled the door closed behind me. The chaos erupted as the elevator doors shut, screams, sobs, the crash of a teacup shattering against the wall. In the mirrored walls of the descending elevator, I saw my own face. My expression was calm, my eyes dry, my breathing even. Asterisk Grandma, your Iris didn't cry. And she didn't lose, asterisk. Monday morning, I returned to the nursing home. Aunt Patricia was already in the director's office, enumerating my sins on her fingers. I walked past her, set the registry's confirmatory documents and the formal statement about the harassment on the director's desk, and said, "Mr. Norris, these explain the situation." He read them, his eyebrows rising, and then he looked at Aunt Patricia and said, "Ma'am, leave now, or I'll call the police." She left, her heels clacking down the hallway like gunshots. Mrs. Eleanor in bed 3 was waiting for me. When she saw me walk in, her whole face lit up. She fumbled under her pillow and pressed a caramel candy into my hand with fierce determination. "Eat," she said, her voice slurred but her eyes bright. "After sweet, the bitter goes away." I stood by her bed holding that candy for a long time, thinking about family, how some people give you their blood and abandon you under a bridge, and some people are just strangers in the next hospital bed who press food into your hands. Catherine called a few days later. "The compensation is secure. Relocation unit selection next year. By the way, we could file a civil suit for unjust enrichment, the $20,000. The receipt is solid evidence." "No," I said. "They can't afford to repay it. The interest on that loan was my grandmother." A week after the confrontation, Maya moved out of the Hart house. She rented a tiny studio 2 blocks from my apartment and found a front desk job at a chain hotel. She showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening with a cake. Fresh cream, 8 inches, a wobbly line of gel icing on top, asterisk Iris and Dawn. June 18, asterisk. "I picked a new name," she said. "Dawn Lin. I'm not Maya Hart anymore. And I'm sure as hell not hope for a son." She set the cake on my table and inserted 2 candles. This day was always supposed to be ours. From now on, we split it. We ate the cake straight from the pan, no plates. She cried a little, and I didn't tell her to stop. The mobilization injections were uncomfortable, bone-deep aches, fatigue that settled into my joints like wet sand, but manageable. On the 3rd day, Margaret cornered me outside the hospital, clutching a stainless steel thermos. "Iris, Mom made you chicken soup. The injections are hard on the body. You need to replenish." Her voice was soft, her eyes red-rimmed. For a moment, I almost believed her. She talked for a long time. The word "Mom" appeared many times. The words "I'm sorry" did not. Eventually she circled around to the real purpose. I heard the compensation came through. "Mom's just worried someone will cheat you." I pushed the thermos back toward her chest. "I called you Mom for the first time today. That was from my grandmother. She called you sister, and you charged her $20,000. This Mom from me is free. Account settled. Don't come back." Collection day arrived. 4 hours hooked to an apheresis machine, blood cycling out one arm, through the whirring centrifuge, and back in the other. Dr. Zhou stayed with me the whole time, peeling oranges, adjusting the flow rate. When the machine chimed, Target volume reached. A nurse lifted the collection bag, a small transparent pouch of pale yellow fluid, almost invisible. A 19-year-old's life, that light and that heavy. Dr. Zhou handed me an envelope. Anonymous, per protocol. Inside, a note torn from a notebook, the handwriting weak and trembling, as if written by someone who barely had the strength to hold a pen. I'm sorry. Thank you, no name. I tucked it into my bag, next to the photocopy of the receipt. One paper recording how they sold me. One recording how I gave that life back. Account settled. Months passed. Lucas recovered enough to leave the sterile unit, his hair growing back in dark fuzz. Richard put the apartment on the market to pay the mountain of medical bills. The rosewood beads disappeared from his wrist. Dawn came by on weekends. We made tea eggs together, Dorothy's recipe, the star anise, the dark soy, the slow, patient simmer. The first time Dawn tasted one, she went very still, and then she cried. "This is it," she said. "The taste from the alley. I've been looking for it my whole life." In late fall, I used a fraction of the compensation to put a down payment on a small south-facing apartment near the nursing home. Second-hand, but the light was good. The winter's sun could reach all the way from the balcony to the foot of my bed. I set Dorothy's photograph on the windowsill, the black and white portrait from her 60th birthday, her lips pressed together in that gentle smile. Outside the window, 3 blocks south, was Chestnut Lane, now a cleared construction site, the old bungalows replaced by earth movers and rebar. The scorch mark from her breakfast cart was buried under new foundations. But the smell of tea eggs and 5-spice, the warmth of a coal stove at dawn, those things, no bulldozer can erase. I stood at the window as the street lamps came on, soft yellow pools of light in the gathering dusk. "Grandma," I said, "we're home." In the city beyond the glass, a tower crane's red warning light blinked against the night sky. In a hospital room across town, a boy was writing shaky letters on a piece of notebook paper. In a studio apartment 2 blocks away, a succulent on a windowsill unfurled new leaves, and a young woman named Dawn was learning to sleep without nightmares. And on my windowsill, a black and white photograph held the face of an old woman who'd never learned to write her own name. She taught me, in the end, the only thing that mattered: a life isn't defined by where you're abandoned. It's defined by which direction you choose to walk when the light is almost gone.